Heck, I'm not doing business with you now.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Mike.
Can you hear us in New York? All right, if you can, we can't hear you. Are you on mute there, maybe?
Still no sound.
I'm assuming they can hear us because they're scrambling. All right, we're starting to hear you. It just needs a lot more volume.
Is that better?
A little bit.
How about now?
It just, we can hear you. It just sounds like it's far away. Doesn't sound like it's coming through the microphones on the table. It's like the AT&T commercial. Can you hear me now? It's sounding a little better.
You got that.
All right, give us another test.
How about now?
A little better.
Hello, hello. How about now?
That's really
We
good.
can hear you. Here we go. He's running.
All right. We're making progress here. A lot of wires for this day and age of Bluetooth technology here.
Almost there. Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Much better. Great. Thank you. All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I'd like to thank everyone for the time and effort to be here at the meeting. We appreciate everybody's time. Just to start with, by way of introductions, we do have with us today Natasha Harvin-Locklear. Natasha is with our Office of Legal Services at DCJS. She'll be replacing Brett Knowles as counsel for the commission. Brett deserted us and went over to the state police. So welcome, Natasha, and we're thrilled to have you here.
Thank you.
So getting to our agenda, we did circulate the draft updated agenda for today's meeting. If there's any questions or discussion, if not, do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Do I have a second? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, that carries unanimously. Next, we have review and approval of the draft minutes from the December 13th, 2019 meeting. Those minutes were also circulated with the meeting materials. If there are no comments, do I have a motion to approve those minutes? Motion. Do I have a second? All right, Judge, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, that carries unanimously. Next on our agenda are accreditations and laboratory updates. The first item we have for informational purposes is an update with regard to the Erie County Forensic Toxicology Laboratory. As I read the materials, this relates to the notification of a retirement and replacement of the laboratory's technical leader. So William Kaufman retired, and the position was filled by a Lawrence Perkins. Do we have any questions with regard to this item? Next, again, for informational purposes, relating to the Nassau County Division of Forensic Sciences. As I read the materials, the laboratory had an off-site review and received no findings. They continue to remain in compliance. Obviously, we have Pat here with us. Does anyone have any questions regarding this item? Congratulations, Pat, for the review and the fact that there were no findings.
Thank you.
Next, we have the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services Latent Print Laboratory. Again, this is for informational purposes only. As I read the materials, the lab had an off-site review and received no findings. They continue to remain in compliance. The lab has also notified ANAB and the Commission of its new director, Andrea Lester. Andrea is here with us today. Her CV has been provided. Does anyone have any questions with regard to either of those items? All right, thank you. And Andrea, welcome and congratulations. Next item, and this item does require a vote, relates to the New York City Office of Chief Medical Examiner, Department of Forensic Biology. And as I read this, this relates to ANAB conducting their full reassessment audit in October of 2019. The lab, I believe, received one nonconformity that was addressed satisfactorily. The DNA Subcommittee has reviewed the documentation and issued a binding recommendation to renew the New York State accreditation for this laboratory. So we do have, I believe, Meredith Rosenberg and Kyra McKay available in New York City for questions. Do we have any questions regarding this item?
A question to you, Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman. Why is that different? Why does the DNA Subcommittee review the accreditation of that lab?
I believe because they do DNA testing.
Because they have DNA as a discipline, that would go to them for the DNA.
So that's true of
Any lab that does DNA
Okay.
testing.
By statute.
Okay. Thanks.
Good morning, Ben. I hope you don't mind we got started.
Not at all.
This is the first vote other than approving the agenda in the minutes, though, so we'll give you a minute to get settled.
I do have a question about that nonconformity.
Maybe we can, either Meredith or Kyra or both, if you would join us at the table, please.
Good morning. Meredith Rosenberg,
Just-
Deputy Director.
If I can, Ben, for your help in catching up, this is
Page 39.
under item 4 regarding accreditations, and it's the New York City Office of Chief Medical Examiner, Department of Forensic Biology, relating to their reaccreditation. I'm sorry for the interruption. Go ahead.
Thanks. Could you just explain what exactly happened here? I read it. I also read what you did to fix it, but I just don't understand. Do you have like a person that's testing it that on their own decided they were going to do something different? I just couldn't quite wrap my head around how did this take place in the first place.
That's the person who was performing the testing as the assessor was observing them, did not decide on their own to veer from any sort of protocol. It was actually practice for the mitochondrial DNA unit to add a little bit more sample, rather that they add a little bit more water to the sample as they're preparing for the sequencing procedure, and that's so that they'll have enough sample for 4 reactions that's required for each sample for that procedure. The thing is that the mitochondrial procedure didn't actually say that you could add a little bit more water to the sample, and by a little bit more I'm talking fraction of a drop of water. So what the group did to remediate this finding was that they just put their practice into policy in the SOP because that was what every member of the group was doing. It just never made it into the policy. So once it made it into the policy, that was sufficient for the assessment team to understand that, yes, now you're actually following what you're saying that you're doing.
So it's more in line with, you just did, your policy wasn't up to date, but what they were doing was okay, and it didn't affect the results.
Exactly, because there's such an abundance of DNA in that sample that that fraction of water really has no impact on the amount of DNA going into that reaction.
Thank you.
Was part of the change also to make sure that whatever was done in terms of adding anything or documenting the total amount or volume in the sample was all of that was recorded and documented?
Yes, so our LIM system was also updated so that it will calculate the volume that they require for the reaction. So that's going to get documented in the procedures, in the paperwork for the samples as well.
So then going forward, given the changes you've made, if someone looks at the materials that they're provided, they'll be able to understand exactly what happened in terms of whether something was added and how much and what the end result was.
Absolutely.
All right. And any other questions?
Well, the scope of the accreditation, because I know that OCME has a local database. Does this reach that?
No, as I understand it, we have no authority over any local databases. Our authority, we certainly have responsibility with regard to state database and samples that go in there, and with regard to testing they do, but I don't believe we have any statutory ability to oversee local.
So our approval doesn't speak to that?
Correct. Our approval does not give them authority to do anything with regard to the local. All right, any other questions? Thank you. Oh, I'm glad.
I'm sorry. So obviously there's, for understanding, can you just discuss the wide range of template that can be used in mito so nobody thinks that the issue had any severity on casework?
I'm not 100% sure since I haven't been trained in mitochondrial DNA what the range is, but my understanding is it can vary anywhere from 5 microliters to a nanogram or more of DNA.
Right, without having any effect on the end result of the sequencing reaction. It's such a wide range that just by adding a little bit more of DNA, even a significant amount more, would not have any effect on the final electropherogram result.
But why would you do it then?
They were adding a little bit more water to the sample prep just because they have to allocate 4 wells of that one sample for the reaction, and so they want to make sure they have enough for the 4 wells. So they're just bringing it up so that they can have enough.
And now they're creating enough reaction for 1 extra tube that they dispose of, and that's the carryover for if there's not enough for the 4th tube.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? All right, thank you. If there are no other questions, do I have a motion to accept the binding recommendation of the DNA Subcommittee and renew the New York State accreditation of the New York City Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, Department of Forensic Biology, and the Discipline of Biology for the period concurrent with their A and AB accreditation? I have a motion. Do I have a second? A second, Pat. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Any abstentions?
I
All right,
abstain.
that carries. Okay, so 1 abstention. We still have a quorum, correct, with 1 abstention?
Yes.
All right, so that carries. And then with regard to the same laboratory, for informational purposes, we were notified that Kyra, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, McKay, has been named. Kira, I'm sorry, my apologies. So Kira McKay has been named the new quality manager.
Congratulations.
Next, we have the New York City Police Department Police Laboratory. This is for informational purposes. There's no vote required. As I read the materials, in November of 2019, ANAB conducted a surveillance visit. There were no findings, and the laboratory continues to remain in conformance with its accreditation requirements. Also, I believe there were changes that included updating equipment and firearms, fire debris, and materials or trace discipline. The lab notified ANAB and the commission that the QA manager, Jennifer Laddie, has been transferred to a different unit, and that Scott will be acting as the QA manager. ANAB acknowledged receipt of that notification. So again, not for a vote, but are there any questions for Scott with regard to any of these items or any of the materials? Congratulations on the surveillance visit and the no findings.
Thank you.
Next, we have the Suffolk County Crime Laboratory. I believe Connie Dinkle is available by phone if we need her. This is for informational purposes only. There's no vote. ANAB sent a revised scope and certificate for the lab's records. Event reconstruction was removed from the firearms discipline as it was incorporated into the crime scene. Event reconstruction and trajectory determination was added to firearms. As I read the materials, those were the only changes. Do we have any questions with regard to this item?
No.
All right. Next, we have the Westchester County Division of Forensic Toxicology. I believe Chris Cording is available. This is a letter from January 3rd of this year regarding change in key management. The lab has hired Brian Scharf as senior toxicologist. Do we have any questions regarding this notification? Next, we have the Niagara County Sheriff's Office of Forensic Laboratory. And again, this is for informational purposes, no vote required. On February 24th, ANAB conducted a surveillance assessment. As I read the materials, I believe there were 8 nonconformances found, and that the laboratory is in the process of determining its corrective action plan. I believe there is a representative available by phone if we have questions. Does anyone have questions regarding this? I'm assuming this will be on our next item for them to report to us on what they've done to address these nonconformances.
Mike, was this in the supplemental?
Yes.
I think it's maybe 237 to 261.
Okay.
I'm going to give folks a minute to take a look at it.
This is very much ongoing. We received another email this morning, so it's...
Can everyone hear Shelley?
Yes.
What was the email this morning?
It was between ANAB and the lab updating some of the corrective action plan. So they're not even at the point of finalizing their corrective action plan. It's still developing.
Okay.
Anyone have questions, or you want us to get them on the phone?
I think I'm good as long as we have on the next agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah, it will definitely be an agenda item at our next meeting.
Would you like us to re-provide these documents with the additional ones?
Yes, for the next meeting. I think that'd be helpful if we put everything pertaining to this in there. I would suggest at that time that we make sure they have someone available too, because I'm guessing there's going to be questions. All right, that takes care of everything under the accreditation section. So next we have old business. With regard to old business, the first item we have is an update with regard to Familial Search. Jill, can you give us that update?
Sure. So since the last commission meeting, there have been 2 additional applications received. So we're a total of 37 applications. Of those 37 applications, 1 was withdrawn, 12 were rejected, and 23 were approved. The 23 that were approved, 11 searches have been completed 1 is in process, and 11 remain in the search queue. 1 application is still in review. We're awaiting supplemental information to proceed with that application.
All right, any questions? Next item was supposed to be an update on genetic genealogy. We've been keeping this on every meeting for Dr. Walsh to keep us updated on what the Department of Health is doing. Unfortunately, due to her work schedule at the Department of Health, she wasn't able to make it today. So I would suggest that we put this over and make this an agenda item at our next meeting and ask her to give us an update. Under new business, the next item on the agenda, the first thing we have are annual lab summaries. I don't know, Shelley or Jill, if someone could just give the commission a brief description of what this is.
Sure. So these documents are a summary of all of the documentation that's been submitted from each laboratory in 2019 relevant to the compliance with their New York State accreditation. Basically, it's everything that's come before us in 2019. This has been reviewed and attested to by all of the laboratory directors, and we do have representatives from each of the labs available if there are any questions on those.
All right, any questions? All right. Next item on the agenda relates to laboratory disclosures. First, we have the New York City Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. Oh, I'm sorry, what did I skip?
Partial match.
Partial, I'm sorry. So going back to new business, we had implemented the partial match and familial search policy, and specifically the familial search policy. We indicated that we would revisit it periodically. I think we made a conscious decision to be very conservative at the time that we enacted the initial policy, with the understanding that we could see how things were working and revisit. And so we've had discussions both at the commission level and with staff, about revisiting. And so, Jill, I don't know if you want to start the discussion and tell us what you and your team have done.
Sure. So our office first began evaluating both the partial match and the familial search policies, and reached out to our partners at the state police and joined together in getting some ideas of what improvements could be made or changes that needed to be made. And I brought a summary to the Dna Subcommittee of those points. I will reiterate them here. Start with the partial match policy and a couple of changes that we are looking to make are the removal of the attachment A of the policy. And what that is the calculations. And there is reference made to it in the policy to give a better understanding of definitions. We would incorporate those definitions into the policy. We believe that the calculations were listed out due to the change in statistical methods at that time. And this is a software-driven calculation, so it is what it is. So I would say that removal of attachment A, but incorporating those definitions into the policy was one of the changes we were looking to make.
That's with regard to partial match?
It's a partial match, correct.
All right. Was there anything else on the partial match side?
Yes. So we were looking to remove the specific 2-year revision that's stated in the partial match. New York State, I was speaking with the special counsel, we're required to take a relook every 5 years at our regulations.
Which will change. Every time you amend the regs, that number will change, so.
Right, okay, so, but our thoughts were that if there were any policy concerns, they could be brought up at any time, that there was nothing that prohibited us from doing it sooner, so we would just remove that specific revision time period for partial match.
Anything else with regard to partial match?
Those were the only 2 items that we had flagged.
All right. And then what about with regard to familial search?
For familial search, we would incorporate the addition of unidentified human remains, which would incorporate sample requirements that the state police have given us, single source, recovered from a deceased individual whose identity is unknown, reside in Estes, and having been searched against DNA profiles of offenders contained in the state DNA databank. So this is something that we have discussed in previous meetings of taking a look at, and we've talked to the state police, and there would be nothing that would prohibit the addition of that into the policy at this time. So we were looking to make that change.
My recollection is that we did have an application where a law enforcement agency was seeking a familial search with regard to an unidentified remains, and that we denied that because we didn't feel that it was specifically authorized under the existing policy.
Correct. We've also had phone calls inquiring about submission of possible applications to it as well. So I think this would be a useful addition to the policy.
And if we did that, would we do it in a way that there'd still be discretion, right? So that if it was an unidentified remains, basically I'm thinking that the focus is generally on cases where there's some indication this may be a criminal investigation, that there may be a crime. Is that the thought, that we would still be at least taking that into account? And but that we would change them or revise them in a way that didn't preclude that type of case from being considered?
Correct. I think what we would look to do is to really hone in on the case details in the summary and exhausting all of their investigative leads, and take a look at that and approve based on that.
All right. I'm sorry, were there others?
And one more thing for the familial search, which was to add the language of the memorandum of understanding into the application process. So that not only does it streamline it, but it removes that additional time-consuming step of getting the signatures on the MOU one more time. This would require both a regulatory and policy change because the MOU is specifically stated in the regs as well. So this is something we would look to combine and make the application cohesive with both parts of it.
Again, under our current procedure, if I understand it right, the head prosecutor, district attorney, and the head of the law enforcement agency have to sign the application, submit it. If it's approved, and if there's testing, and then there are results, there's a training, and then the same folks have to sign an MOU at the end of that process right now?
The MOU is actually on the front end, so once the application is approved and has gone through all of our checks, we then issue a memorandum of understanding to those entities. They are required to sign those and bring that back again.
It's the same people who are signing the application have to sign it. So the proposal would just be to consolidate those into one document, put it all of the same. So we wouldn't be changing the information. We'd just be putting it into one document, so they just have to sign once instead of having these two separate steps.
Correct.
All right. All right, anything else?
The signature, would it be at the beginning where the signatures would happen, or the end? At what part of the process?
So the signatures would happen at the end of the application, so the front end step, but excuse me, our office would make notification to when the application has been approved and is proceeding to the queue. So that way, the MOU kind of held that place. Our office would be taking on with the state police and communicating when that application has been completed and moves to the next step.
Okay.
Yeah, I assume if we are going to do these things, they would all need to be written up. We'd actually have to see actual copy of regulations and then formally vote to approve them after they've all been written up.
Yeah, so what my hope is that for the next DNA subcommittee meeting, we can provide draft materials to them as well for any final input, and then bring those to the next commission meeting.
All right. So for today, what we'd be looking for from people, if there's any comments, feedback, any comments on those changes, any additions anyone wants to add, just so that we can take that into account in finalizing that. So
This is Scott. I'm just sorry.
Go ahead,
I'm just wondering. So some of these changes would be to the case requirements and the sample requirements. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And
Are you specifically talking about with regard to the unidentified remains?
correct. I'm looking at the document just to understand where that change would be. I understand the next version would be from the DNA Subcommittee, but I'm just looking at the way the case requirements are written. That would be something that would be added to that area, and also the sample requirements.
Correct.
Okay. And then I was just wondering from your discussions, what was deemed the rate determining step that was taking, the familial searching, we have 11 in the search queue, the timeliness of getting all this work done. Was it what came from the discussions that we could change the policies? Because it doesn't seem like we're changing the policy to make it more efficient at the moment. Is there nothing that we could do to help make this more efficient?
That might be better addressed to, you're referring to the actual testing itself, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right, Scott?
No, I was actually just referring to, is there anything that came up from the discussions that we could change in the policy to expedite it, like the MOU being indoctrinated into the, was there anything else other than that?
That was the only
Maybe
area
the answer's
that
no.
yeah, that was the only area that we had identified that we could, streamline the process a bit.
Speaking from what I see of the process, the biggest thing I've seen slowing the process down from the piece of it that DCJS is involved in, honestly, has to do with the quality of the information we're getting in the applications. And we've gotten some that are amazing and, lay things out, very clearly and in good detail. And we've gotten others, that I read them and I'm sitting here scratching my head, trying to figure out what happened and what samples they're talking about and, what was done with them in the past. So, and in those instances, we wind up going back to the submitters and, basically saying we can't approve it on this. If you've got more, if you can clarify, and that has held up the review on our end for months sometimes. So, in terms of expediting, the MOU step will help a little bit. It's not huge, but from our perspective, the thing that would save more time than anything else in expediting these is if folks who are writing these things were very careful. And we had discussions in, when we approved this policy, and I remember the judge being part of them and others, kind of analogizing these things to search warrant applications or wiretap applications. And while we're not looking for that length, that type of clarity in terms of laying out what happened would be very helpful, in moving these things along quickly. So, to the extent folks either through the DA's Association or other organizations you're connected with, can get that message out there, that would really speed the process along from our end.
And just to go along with that, our office partnered with the state police, have put some additional resources on our website to help with the application process itself. There is a PowerPoint presentation that we've developed that would more clearly outline how the application process should go, as well as denoting in there that prior to making application, it's recommended that the submitters reach out to the local labs to even look at the possibility of the sample being approved and having these necessary sample requirements to go further with familial search. So those are two areas that we've looked at that we've kind of outside of the policy been able to make adjustments. So we're hopeful that that will also help guide folks.
Jill, was there any discussion regarding the training aspect? I know at a previous meeting we had discussed the possibility that as we get deeper and deeper into this, it might be the same agency, might be the same investigator. Under our current rules, he or she would have to go through the training again. Is that discussed, like maybe the training could last for a period of 5 years or something like that?
So with that, we looked at the specific language that is in the policy, and we are going to find a way where we still fulfill that within the language. It may not be exactly the same as we're doing it now. But again, we want to ensure what those test results mean, whether there's news release or not, and that they understand the impact of that. So, we will look to make changes to that, but we didn't think it needed to be reflected in the language of the policy.
I assume you've done multiple trainings up to this point?
Correct.
And can other officers attend the training even though they might not be directly involved in the case to get certified in the area?
So far we've viewed this as a case by case. We've not viewed it that if you attend, you've got this blanket certification. And I hear what you're saying. I would kind of throw out another thought for consideration, and that is, so far we've taken the position that no matter what the results are, and I think literally this is the way our policy reads, whether there are positive results or whether they've run the testing and the result is that there is nothing, we've taken the position that there needs to be the same training, because that's kind of the way that is the way the policy reads as I read it. So I personally think that if there are positive results that are being disclosed, I'm of the mindset that there's value in having people come in every time, just given the risk attendant on misuse of that and our kind of overall philosophy of being very cautious and trying to make sure we guard against any abuse. But I think where I would see room for improvement is if what we're releasing is the fact that there are no results and the person has been through a training before. I'm not so sure that there's the need to make them come back for another training to tell them, that we did the search and there's nothing and you can come back in 6 months if you want and, look to get this redone. So that, I hear what you're saying, but personally, I think there's some value in any time we're releasing this, having the people that are getting released to hear this stuff. But I think we might want to think about whether or not we want to require that same level of training when we're telling
maybe an
them.
expedited version or something.
Yeah, or saying if you've been through it before and we're just telling you there's nothing, if you've been through it in the last 5 years, or some expedited version, because certainly there are some things we want people to understand when we tell them that there was nothing that could be reported to them out of this process, but maybe not the full team coming to Albany for the full training.
All right.
Any other comments or thoughts with regard to this? If not, then as I understand the process, we will work with our counsel here and write something up formally for the DNA Subcommittee to react to, and then this will be on our agenda at our next meeting to review whatever the DNA Subcommittee did and officially react to that as a commission. All right, thank you, and I appreciate the work of all of the staff on this. Thank you.
Mike?
Yes.
Real quick, when someone is moving their papers around, they're hitting a microphone and we can't hear over that. So if we could just be careful of that, that would be helpful.
We will do that. I think we just figured that out. So
Okay.
Our apologies.
No worries. Thank you.
I think I know who the culprit is.
Hey, she's no, come on.
All right. Next, we have item 7, laboratory disclosures. The first item we have is the New York City Office of the Chief Medical Examiner Forensic Toxicology Lab. I believe Gail Cooper is available in New York City. Is that right?
She is not. By phone.
Okay. All right. So this, as I read the materials, is an initial notification of a non-conforming event where there was a sample switch between 2 cases. As I read it, there was a report issued in the one case, and the switch was detected while reviewing the second case. And then upon reanalysis of both cases, an amended report was issued for the first case, and the report in the second case was issued only after that reanalysis was completed. And as I understand it, the lab is currently in the process of conducting a root cause analysis. So first, I guess, just for the staff, will this be on our agenda at our next meeting for them to report to us on the results of the root cause analysis and
Yes.
corrective actions?
Yes.
If not this, maybe September. I don't know their timeline.
Right, whatever their timeline is for their corrective action, once they've finished that and come to a closeout, it'll be back on the agenda.
All right. Any questions in the meantime for the OCME with regard to this item?
Mike, I just think we should maybe just get a verbal update, just because it's been a couple of weeks, so maybe they've identified some potential reason, and so maybe we can get an update.
No, I agree. That makes sense.
Hello.
Hi, Gail?
Yes.
You're on the phone with the Commission on Forensic Science.
Thank you.
Hello, Doctor. Thank you for joining us. Scott O'Neill has a question to start things off. Scott?
Okay. Gail, let's talk Scottish so no one can understand it.
It's my pleasure, Scott.
So, Gail, I'm just asking just for a quick update. Since the notification of the letter, have you been able to come up with any reason for this switch happening and any steps you've put in place to minimise this from happening in the future? That was really the question.
Okay, so we completed our internal review as part of our non-conformity procedures and referred everything to the RCA committee, who have still to be formed. So we went through the usual checking exactly what happened with the batch of cases that were tested that day. We went through the member of staff who allocated or took specimens for testing. We couldn't find any error in the process of what they do on a day-to-day basis, but of course we can't go back and see what happened that day. We are making an assumption that it happened during the allocating of the specimens, but again it will be the outcome of the RCA committee to say whether or not they agree with us. The person has had their training revisited. They were a new member of staff, but again, as I say, we saw no issues with how they handled the casework. There's no reason to suspect that they did anything in particular wrong that day, but something happened between the sample being taken for analysis and then the data processed the following couple of days later. So it's still very early stages. The RCA committee have obviously got their job to do.
Okay. Thank you, Gail.
Thanks.
So where are you in the process in terms of, what else is there to do? When are you going to report back to NAB?
So we're waiting on the RCA committee to be formed, which I believe will be happening soon. That is with our Director of Quality Assurance. And I would have thought that it would be relatively quick. I would assume that we would be close to having a conclusion of that before the next commission meeting. But again, they can update you closer to the time.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? All right, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll see this item again then. Next, we have the New York State Police Crime Laboratory. We do have Ray with us. As I read the materials, this relates to a non-conforming work event with regard to firearms. And if I'm reading this right, Ray, maybe if you can come up. I just have a question that is kind of more general about NIBIN and trying to understand the larger implications, of any, for this. But as I understand this, in the NIBIN equipment, software, whatever itself, there was a drop-down box where you enter the caliber and it defaulted to the prior case, whatever was entered in the prior case. Am I understanding that right?
So that's right. I've also brought Brad Brown, who's our forensic supervisor over firearms. So Brad, maybe if you could.
So NYBN, as part of the acquisition process, has a series of windows with drop downs. It's series 2 drop downs you would have, similar to drop downs you'd have in Microsoft Excel. And there's also some free text entry boxes. Unbeknownst to me, but on some of these fields, the fields didn't clear. They retained the memory from the last entry, even if the analyst logged out and logged back in. And what happened in this particular case, the prior entry that the analyst made was .40 caliber. The case in question was a 9mm Luger. He failed to change that caliber, and it resulted in a missed NYBN hit. The case in question, there were two shootings on October 10th, 2019 in a jurisdiction in Orange County, New York. They happened in a short period of time within close proximity. So when the agency and the DA's office got the report, they were surprised that there was no hit. The ADA called me up, and I said, well, the easiest thing to do is let's just do a microscopic comparison. And when I pulled the cases to do that, I noticed the error. The analyst corrected the error in NYBN, relaunched the correlations, and the cases developed a lead.
All right. No, so in terms of your work, I have no questions. I think it was great. I guess my larger question, though, is was this something specific to the NYBN equipment with the New York State Police, or is this potentially a larger issue that maybe not the commission, but that somebody should be looking at or alerting folks to with regard to other NYBN pieces of equipment around the state?
I mean, it is possible. It's unbeknownst to us if it's widespread or not, but we've made the vendor aware of it. They remotely changed these settings, and it wasn't every, it's hard to understand, but it wasn't every single field, but
just certain fields would carry over.
Certain fields carried over. So,
all right.
Do you know if those remote changes that they made affected only your terminals, or if it affected widespread in the software?
They're specific to our 3 brass tracks instruments, which are just in our lab. So.
All right.
Mike?
Yeah.
It's Pat. So when I read this over, I had phoned the firearms supervisor downstairs to check to see if we defaulted back to blank. And it's definitely not statewide because we default back to blank.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you. All right. Anything else?
So just one more thing. If it's possible that it's not statewide, is it a version issue? Is there something that you need to incorporate in terms of keeping up to date with the vendor and rolling out of a different version? Or
Jill, Dr. Dooley, now that we're aware of this problem, we're monitoring it, and we will run QC testing every time there's a new version, and we'll watch out for these errors.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item we have is the Onondaga County Center for Forensic Services. We do have Kathy Corrado here with us again. Thank you. And this is, I read the materials as the initial notification for a nonconformance in which samples from 2 different cases were switched during a batch extraction. As I read it, the lab's currently doing an investigation, reviewing all of the analyst's cases from 2019. And then I believe there's a second disclosure, also an initial notification of a nonconformance in a latent print discipline. And that relates to an examiner that either inadvertently failed to take photographs or inadvertently deleted the photograph of a latent print. If I remember correctly, I think this was one of a large number of prints in that particular case. In that instance, as I read the materials, the lab's completed its root cause, determined that there was no policy changes needed, that staff were reminded of the current policy, and the issue is closed. So any questions for Kathy with regard to, are you speaking on both of these?
I am. I also have, if there's any questions on the latent print issue, I have our latent print supervisor can be on the line as well.
All right. So let's take them one at a time. Does anyone have any questions with regard to the sample switch incident? So I guess from my perspective, is this something you're going to report back to both ANAB and the commission when you finish your investigation?
Yes, we'll report back to the commission. ANAB has indicated they don't need to report back. They just check it when they come out for the on-site, but we will report back to the commission.
All right, and beyond what I just summarized or what's in the materials, do you have any update for us on what you've found so far?
I can do that if you'd like.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. Thanks.
How you been? All right. So we are actually pretty far into this investigation. This was, as Commissioner Green said, it was a sample switch between two samples, two different cases. The case was actually worked in March of 2019, and we detected the sample switch through our normal QA program, part of our reanalysis of casework. This was a very small sample set. There were just the two casework samples and one proficiency test sample and two reagent blanks in that extraction set. We determined that the switch occurred during the extraction phase of the analysis. And when we looked at the root cause, we spent a lot of time on it. It was actually, because it was a small sample set and because it was done back in March, it was hard to kind of come up with what could have happened. But, basically there were no concentrations done, so there are really only two steps in the extraction step or process that could have a sample switch. One is when the extract is loaded onto a column, and then the second would be when that DNA sample is eluted from the column. So there's really only two steps that a sample switch could occur. And both of those steps are verified. We have a second person verify the order of the tubes at each of those steps. So it was kind of difficult to determine, given that the analyst checks them and the verifier checks them. So the best we can determine is in doing the root cause, and we spent a lot of time with the analysts in question, asking, talking through it. We also talked with all the other analysts in this section to see if they had any ideas. And one person did comment that they had on a different occasion, not this occasion, but on a different occasion when they were verifying the tubes for this analyst, after they did the verification, the analyst said, I want to recentrifuge these, make sure that the liquid's at the bottom of the tube, and they went to do that. And then the verifier said, well, if I just verified those tubes, so if you recentrifuge them, I'm going to have to re-verify them again, which is right. And so, we're wondering if perhaps maybe this has happened in that case. Maybe the analyst, after it was verified, decided they needed to vortex it or centrifuge it or something, and maybe they put them in the wrong order. I mean, it's really the best we can really surmise at this point in time. It was a sample switch. So we obviously reiterated the verification procedure, and that once the tubes are verified, you have to then immediately do the transfer. You can't do any steps in between. As far as the reviewing the analyst casework, this analyst worked approximately 21 cases during 2019. In addition, they also did 2 proficiency tests that were completed without any issues. We reviewed those 21 cases. Of those, we decided 15 we needed to check to be reanalyzed to make sure there were no other sample switches. The other ones didn't need it for various reasons. They were just another retesting of something that we already knew the profile, so we could tell that it was right. Of those 15, we've reanalyzed 14 of them. That's 22 samples. All of the results were consistent. There were no issues. We're just waiting on the last case we had. It was delayed getting it back from the police agency. That case were 2 blood samples from the same case that were consistent with each other, so we don't anticipate any issue there, but we're going to retest it anyway. So the retesting is pretty much done. We haven't seen any other issues. The analyst is going through some retraining, doing a number of extraction sets. We're going to have them do that. We'll have their casework monitored. Once they go back online, they'll do a proficiency test. Once they go back online, we'll monitor their casework for 3 to 6 months. And at that point, as soon as we're finished with the reanalysis of the last case, we'll report back, because we feel, and once the person's finished with their retraining and proficiency testing, we'll wrap that up and report back.
All right, any questions? All right, Thank you. Is it Mark Mills you're going to get with regard to the second?
Yes.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I would like to have Mark just explain to us why this was closed out and what they did.
Yes, I can do the first part if you want.
Yeah,
and then if
no,
Mark
that's
has any
fine.
questions.
That's fine.
Yeah, okay. I'll wait till he gets on the line because I think they can't watch it. We have a hard time watching it live, so I'll make sure he can hear it.
Smart Mills.
Hi, Mark. You're on the phone with the Commission on Forensic Science.
Hi, Mark.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, Mark. This is Kathy. We just started. I asked to have you on the line in case there's things that I can't answer. So I'm just going to go through what the issue is. So this case was a very high-profile harassment case that required the analyst. The case came in, and the police needed it done immediately. It was a very high-profile case that needed to be completed as soon as we could. So the analyst was working overtime to complete it. There was just one item in the case. It was a letter in an envelope. The examiner documented 43 prints on that and took 174 photographs documenting those 43 prints. On a subsequent day, when the examiner went to analyze those 43 prints, when she got to print number 40, she realized that it wasn't represented in any of those 174 photographs. So she immediately self-reported the issue. Because of this particular substrate and the way that we do the sequential processing, we couldn't go back to recover that print because it had already been altered by the subsequent processing. It should be clear, just want to make it clear that none of these prints, of the 43, at this point in time, they hadn't been deemed whether they were suitable for identification or not. These were just photographs of ridge details that required analysis. Of the 42 prints that we had, only 17 of them ended up being deemed suitable. So I just want to put that out there. When we tried to look at the root cause for this one as well, it was really hard to know. I mean, obviously, the examiner was working late. She had been 11 hours into her shift when these photographs were taken. Again, there was a large number of prints, there were 43 of them, 174 images. We believe the likely cause is that she inadvertently failed to photograph that particular print. There are some photographs where you can see that the print was documented, but the actual print is out of the range of the photograph. We think probably she either thought it was captured in another print, in a picture of another print, or she just inadvertently failed to take it. We did also point out another possibility, although we think it's less likely, is that maybe she did take the print, but when she had these photographs and moved them over into our ATOM system, which is the system where we keep all the prints for the cases, maybe she failed to bring it over, and it somehow, because of that, we lost it that way. We don't think that's the case, just given that you would think out of 174 photographs, you would have one that captured with this print. So we believe it's probably the former. In looking at this issue and any nonconformance, we're going to look at what were the situation that caused it, what is the risk that we think it might occur again. Given that this is a unique situation, she was working very late, she was likely fatigued, there were a lot of prints, and just given the fact that this is just one step in our process, and we've been doing this for 13 years. They do this every day. We work over 1,000 cases a year. This is the first time this has ever happened. We just feel like this is a one-off human error type of thing, and so we think the risk of it happening again is quite low. And if it were to happen, we would know, because just as in this case, we have a documentation that the print should be there, and we know if we don't have the photograph. So it's not something that would go undetected. So given that, we just feel that this was just a one-off, and we're just going to monitor, and hopefully it doesn't happen again.
Have you ever had situations in the past where you lost a photograph moving them into that, was it the ATOM system or the system you referred to?
Correct. I don't believe so, but Mark, I'll defer to you. Did you hear the question?
Just barely. It was really faint, but I think I got the gist of it. In our entire time here, this was the first instance of a latent print not being captured.
So I think the answer is no. I mean, we've never, either from not moving it or from not capturing it, we've never had that happen before.
All right, thank you. Any other questions?
Yes,
Judge.
I'm just a little confused now. This is a piece of evidence in which there were 42 prints, am I correct?
Yeah.
Is that what you said? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, is there any way to know whether this print is consistent with any other prints, or it comes from some other contributor, or?
So what we can say is that, again, there were 42 images of ridge detail that were photographed. Of those 42, only 17 of those ended up being deemed suitable for identification. Of all the identifications that we made in this case, all of them were to elimination knowns, people that handled that item of evidence after it was found. And so we don't, it's less likely that this print, it may not even have been suitable, it may not have been suitable, and given that the other IDs were all to eliminations, it's possible that it wasn't even a relevant print. In particular, we would point out too that this type of evidence and the way the evidence was presented, it seemed kind of clear to us that the writer of it took some extra efforts to try to not leave evidence. So that's kind of our thought. I don't know, Mark, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, just a couple of points. That print in particular was on the outer mailing envelope, not on the harassment letter itself. And we did have another case that the agencies feel was the same writer. And in that particular case as well, every print that was developed was also identified to elimination people that handled the letter after it was recovered as evidence.
The other question I had is, was the loss of this print revealed to the prosecutor and the defense attorney involved in whatever prosecution there was here?
There was no prosecution.
There's no prosecution? Okay.
Right.
But I will say that the loss of the print is explicitly indicated right on the laboratory report. It very clearly indicates that this print, was documented, and the photograph no longer exists. So that's very clear on the lab report. Yep.
All right, any other questions? Yes.
Yes. So it was noted that this was 11 hours into the examiner's shift. So my first question is, was this high priority the only case that the examiner was working on for the entire 11 hours, or did she volunteer to work on this high priority later on at the end of her shift, and that's what took her into beyond, say, an 8-hour workday?
Mark, can you answer that?
Yeah. Because of the profile nature of this particular case, this was the only case that her efforts were being focused on during that period of time.
So I would just comment in general that is a fatiguing factor if all you're working on for 11 hours is this one case, understanding, as I do quite well, the tensions that surround working on a high priority case where there may be a lot that is hinging on the work of this examiner. So I would certainly want to recognize maybe a little more strongly the fact that, the intensity of the case and then the length of time that the examiner had to work on it and, anticipating expectations for the outcome had to have been a contributing factor. And I'm not saying this in a bad way. I'm just saying that this is just the way it is when it comes to high priorities. So I don't think that it should be minimized that the length of time that she was working on it didn't have an effect. And I don't blame, I think that it's amazing that she was able to do what she did. And, hopefully that this really didn't have any deleterious effect on the case as it is.
Yes, I agree with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, thank you, Kathy and Mark. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have the Suffolk County Crime Laboratory. I believe Connie Dinkle is available by phone. This relates to the closure of a nonconformance. As I read it, it involved an analyst who erroneously combined 2 bags of controlled substance for quantitation. The lab completed a 5-month monitoring of the analyst involved and deemed the event closed. This was originally presented to us, I believe is an initial disclosure back at our September 18th, 2019 meeting. Do we have any questions for Connie Dinkle or for the lab?
Mike, I have a quick question.
Okay.
Good morning, Connie.
Hi, Connie. You're on the phone with the Commission on Forensic Science.
Great, thanks.
Hi, Connie. It's Scott.
Hi, good morning.
Hi, Connie. Just a quick question, and it may be in the paperwork. I just might not have caught it. It does say that there was erroneously combined 2 bags of controlled substances belonging to 2 separate defendants. My question is, was the bags invoiced on the same document? Was it 2 defendants in that particular case, or were these 2 separate cases the analyst was working on and somehow combined them?
They were 2 defendants, 2 different defendants invoiced on the same document.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So that means it's the same case?
I'm sorry?
Yeah, different defendants, but on the same case.
I'm sorry, I can't understand.
The judge was asking if that means that it was 2 defendants, but on the same case.
I'm sorry, yeah, they were put on the same property paper. So typically, they should have been separated by invoice, but they put them on the same property papers. And when the analyst reviewed the casework to start the analysis, she read from the property papers. And on the property papers, it wasn't clear that they were 2 separate defendants.
In combining the bags like that, I assume that that does not conform with your policy or your procedures?
Combining the bags of 2 separate defendants is not our procedure, which is why once she realized the mistake, she immediately stopped working and notified her supervisor.
All right. And again, I apologize if it's in the materials, but what was done, if anything, in terms of, was there retraining? Was there anything along those lines?
Yeah, because she notified us and immediately said, "Oh man, I realize this is now 2 separate defendants." We realized it was a mistake. She made a mistake. So what we did was we took her off casework for a short period of time, the 5 months, and we monitored her using case samples. Is she appropriately reading the paperwork? Is she following the procedures? And then we gave her essentially a blind competency test where we took a piece of evidence and we changed all the paperwork and we gave it to her and we made sure that it had a similar scenario and she appropriately followed the paperwork and did what she needed to do. So then we deemed her able to go back on casework.
All right, thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, just a follow-up.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Dave.
No, go ahead, Scott.
So, Connie, just to understand correctly, what you're saying was you believe the analyst did not read all of the paperwork that would have reflected there was 2 defendants, correct?
That's correct. She actually read the paperwork in the wrong order, which is totally out of character for her and the way she does her work. So we wanted to make sure that since this happened, that going forward she would realize you don't start with the property paperwork, which is how everybody's been trained from the beginning. It's common practice to start with the actual invoices that were attached to the drugs. In this case, both invoices were attached to the property papers to the bags of evidence. So it was just an odd circumstance all the way around. But again, she realized her mistake, unfortunately, too late, but she did realize right away that she needed to make a notification.
So I'm assuming then that there was no way to identify how much each defendant possessed. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, the paperwork was very poorly written also.
But Connie, prior to combining, was there individual identification made of each bag prior to combining?
They both stated, a single bag containing white powder. They didn't say on the bag who each bag belonged to.
Sure. No, I'm just asking, did they identify the controlled substance in each bag first before combining, or they combined then did the testing?
Hold on a second. I don't know if I have that in front of me. I believe so. Yeah, I believe they were identified both as cocaine, but then combined for the quantitation. But I don't. Hold on a second. Let me read it. I don't want to misrepresent this case. I don't have the notes of the analyst in front of me, but based on how I'm reading the corrective action, it doesn't appear that they were identified separately first.
I'm sorry, Connie, does not or does? I didn't hear.
I don't have her case notes in front of me, so I don't want to say whether she identified it or not because I don't know.
Okay, that's fine.
Sorry.
Ben?
Oh, no problem.
So the samples would carry the same case number. How would the defendants
They
be
carry the
distinguished?
same CC number, which is in Suffolk County the identifying case. So the two defendants were arrested at the same time on the same day. So they represented the same CC number, but they didn't have separate lab numbers.
They did or they didn't?
They did not.
So how do you distinguish between the samples that were recovered from two different suspects or defendants?
They should have been. They were properly indicated on the request for analysis, but not on the property paper. She read the wrong paperwork.
So if I understand, were they submitted on one property sheet, but they were on that property sheet, they were identified as two separate items, but they were just on the same sheet? All right.
So, but the bottom line is that there's no way to know who possessed what. Is that correct?
On the actual submission, it said, item number 1 contains such and such by this defendant. Item number 2 contains such and such by this defendant. But she read the paperwork for the property that just said 2 bags of cocaine. It didn't separate them out.
So it would be the defendant's name would actually appear in the paperwork?
I believe it did.
And to the judge's point, I think is the result of combining them. There's no way to say what the weight of either of those individual bags were. So if the question is,
Right, they can't charge either defendant with the quantitative weight because she combined them. So there's no way to know if defendant A had more than defendant B.
Well, is there any way to know if one defendant had a white powder that was not cocaine and the other defendant had cocaine, and when you mix them both, when you combine them, it appears that all of it, is mixed in with the cocaine?
Hold on, I'm pulling out more paper. Let me see if I have more notes.
You could have somebody that has fake drugs,
Right. Okay, so the actual request for analysis stated 1 Ziploc bag, clear, containing a hard substance, defendant 1. And then item number 2 said 1 Ziploc bag containing a hard crystal substance, defendant 2, which was clear. But then on the property paperwork, it just said item number 1, hard substance, item number 2, hard substance. And that's what she read. So then, I don't have her notes. So what she did was, I don't have her notes in front of me, so I don't know how she began her analysis. I just have the copy of the invoices.
I don't know if you can answer this question, but was that revealed to the prosecutor and to the defense attorney that these samples were combined?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, any other questions?
Yes. It was mentioned that the analyst was retrained about reading the paperwork properly. So I was wondering whether in the SOP, does it actually talk about review of submitting paperwork and in what order it should be reviewed?
They actually have that specified in the training manual, so the supervisor decided it wasn't necessary to completely add it to the actual SOP because it was part of their training process, but she did hold a meeting with the entire section to reiterate that the policy was in the training manual and that it was common practice to start with the actual invoice and not the property papers.
Is it common that the property papers are, it seems that they're more general and it's really the specifics that are found on the invoice that is what should be relied on?
Yes.
Okay.
I have a question. How's this documented, or how is this turned over in future cases in which she's the lab person for
the analyst?
Giglio, however you pronounce it.
Yeah, the district attorney's office created a letter, and it advises that this specific analyst conducted chemical analysis that resulted in a corrective action where she erroneously combined the two, and it goes with every discovery packet now that she testifies on.
How would anyone know if she was to switch labs that she's the same person? Say she went and worked for the New York State Police, how would a prosecutor be able to find out that this is the same person that worked in your lab?
This letter's supposed to follow her, as far as we were told. So, unfortunately for her, she'll have this letter with her at all times.
All right, any other questions? All right, thank you.
Sure thing.
Next, we have the Westchester County Division of Forensic Toxicology. I believe Chris Cording's available. This is an initial notification as I read the materials relating to a nonconformance in which the laboratory's LIMS distributed an electronic report without including all test results on the report. Only positive results were reported. Negative results did not appear on the report. As I read this, an amended report was issued to include the negative results. It appears that the lab did audit cases and didn't find any other reports that were missing results. I would ask if we could get Chris. Is he available at New York there?
Good morning.
Morning. I wasn't clear looking at this how many cases were actually looked at. And I also, if I recall correctly, in October, the lab had another LIMS-related report issue. Given these two issues, is there some concern with the LIMS? And are you looking at that?
We actually, the initial nonconformance that you talked about in October related to item descriptions. We've actually solved that problem, so now we have the ability to put full item descriptions in reports, so we don't have to worry about inadvertently releasing incorrect reports. This particular issue, there's several templates that the analyst can choose to write a report. The person who did the report was, so focused on the positive result that they just chose the wrong template. The reviewer didn't pick that up. I audited about a month's worth of cases, so that's probably 30, 40 cases. I do audit them routinely, so this is the only one that I found that had this mistake.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. All right, that concludes that part of our agenda. The next items we have relate to possible executive session. Can I have a motion to go into executive session to discuss the closure of an investigation into a complaint received about a laboratory which might lead to disciplinary action against a particular person or persons within that laboratory. All right, we have a motion. Do I have a second? Second. All in favor? Anyone opposed? All right, that carries unanimously. So we will go into executive session now. If you're not either a commission member or staff, I have to ask you to please leave the room during the executive session part, and we will let everyone know when we come back into session.
All right, and we're back on when you're ready. Let me go get.
I think she's gonna come back in. I'll be there.
Pat, what language does your mother speak? Dialect or Italian or?
It's what's it called? It's dialect. It's dialect. It's not Roman.
From where?
Okay.
It's south of Naples.
Recording. I'll first report that we did not take any formal or official action in executive session. Also indicate that our next meeting will be June 5th of this year. The main meeting site will be New York City. We will have video conference here in Albany. With that, if there's no other business, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Could I ask?
Yep. Absolutely.
I just want to ask for two things to be put on the agenda for June. The first thing is, could we get a report from the lab directors in the state whether or not they have the ability to test marijuana under the new statute that was passed? My lab director tells me that in Onondaga County, marijuana is now legal. So I'm wondering if the other labs have that problem.
We may have a new statute by the June meeting as well. We don't know.
Well, right now, as I understand it, is to be considered illegal, you have to prove that the plant material has 0.3% or more of concentration of THC. And
yeah, I'm just saying we may by June.
Yeah, it might be worse by June.
We may have a new. Well, worse is
it might be
qualitative.
Might be totally
subjective.
Yeah,
but
it's obviously legal in Midtown Manhattan. I've been there recently.
Whatever this state of the law is in June, Scott, could you reach out to the lab directors and just give us feedback from the lab directors in terms of their capacity to do testing under the state of both the law as it exists in June, and if there's anything new, their ability to comply with that.
Yes, no problem.
And the possibility exists this will all be moot back.
Yeah, right. And my other request is that we ask the lab directors to report to this commission as to what effect the new discovery laws are having on their operations, whether it's affecting the quality of their work, whether it's affecting accreditation, whether they need more man and woman power, and whether or not they're able with current staff to be in compliance with it. Not asking them to take an opinion or judgment about the law. I just want to know what effect it's having on operations.
So again, Scott, can you get feedback from the lab directors in that regard as well for us by the June meeting?
Yes.
All right.
What's that? Since you're making them do things, you want to get a vote? I mean, it's more informational, but yeah, if you're requiring to do something.
Sure, let's. Do you want to make that into a motion, asking that we vote on a motion to add those two items to the agenda in June, and ask Scott to follow up with lab directors and give us an update at the June meeting?
Sure. My motion is to get an update as to whether or not the laboratories in the state are equipped to level THC concentrations in cannabis. And the second part of the motion would be to get feedback, specific feedback from the lab directors as to what effect the new discovery laws have had on their operations and their accreditation.
And I would just add to that either as an amendment, or if you want to add it, that Scott is our representative of NYCLAC. Will take the lead in terms of reaching out to NYCLAC and getting the feedback.
Yeah, that's perfectly acceptable to me.
All right. Do we have a second? All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right. Thank you. Any other business? right, if not, then thank you, everybody. We appreciate the time you put in, both at the meetings and outside of the meetings. Appreciate your continued help here and look forward to seeing everyone in June. So do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, safe travels, everyone, and thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Scott, you going to head back?